As baby boomers, many of us learned about values not only from our own parents, but from our television parents. Naturally, the lessons shared in the more innocent age of television were positive ones about honesty, integrity, and the values of hard work. And even though we live in a more cynical age, I think most people still try to live and work according to these positive values with which we grew up. But there are exceptions, and that's why it's so incredibly important to try to understand the values of any kind of business or professional with whom you'll be working. This is such an important issue when it comes to managing your money and choosing a financial advisor that I actually wrote an entire book about it. And today, I'm devoting an entire show to it. It's time to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. Let's get started. Get ready to separate reality from myth.
With us, David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
But David Scranton says, hey, not so fast.
How does it affect the markets? How does it affect the economy? Thanks to efficiencies in new technology and a staff of veteran analysts and portfolio managers, Sound Income Strategies strives to set new standards and bring institutional style investing to your portfolio. Hello everyone and welcome to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, your host. You know, it's no secret that we live in a world where dishonesty and deception today are unfortunately all too common. You could add to that list poor workmanship and outright incompetence. But despite all that, I really do believe the majority of people try to live not only by positive values, but by values specifically right for the work they do. For example, detail orientation might be a value more important to a doctor, especially a surgeon, or an architect than it might be to a farmer. I believe that knowing and practicing the right values is the key to excellence and success in any job or task, and that includes managing your money. Joining us today to talk about this important topic is Bob Burg, author of the best-selling book, The Go-Giver, and leader of the Go-Giver movement. We'll also talk with other financial advisors about the importance of values in their work. But first, let's look at why it's so necessary to examine your own values when it comes time to plan your retirement. You know, there aren't many lines in American literature quoted more often than these by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I think those lines are so famous for one simple reason. For most people, it's very hard to take the road less traveled in life. Not only do you have to possess the right values to take the road less traveled, but you have to act on them. Courage, individuality, and perseverance are some of those values. Proclaiming those values may be easy, but living by them can be much more difficult. In fact, making good financial decisions very often means recognizing when it's time to take the road less traveled and having the ability and courage to actually do it. That's easy to understand when you consider one of the most basic principles of investing, which of course is buy low and sell high. The whole concept runs contrary to the way most people are wired in their minds. You see, we're often skeptical when something is priced low, and we tend to want to hang on to things when they're valuable and priced high. So to be a good investor, you actually have to be a contrarian. You have to know when to zig when others are zagging, and to have the courage to actually do it. That's true in many areas of saving and investing, which I'll discuss more later in the show. But right now, let's look at why it's so crucial in retirement planning to examine your own values with brutal honesty. I encourage you to start by asking yourself, what are my retirement goals? I've discussed this many times before, but it's so important that it bears repeating. The best way to ensure that your financial strategy is moving towards your goals is to start by identifying exactly what those goals are in the first place. Do you plan to retire and sail around the world? Or are you going to buy a boat or a second home? You know, for some people, retirement goals do include major purchases or expensive projects. But in my experience, most people have much simpler retirement goals. They want to travel, they want to dine out whenever they feel like it, golf, fish, visit their children and their grandchildren, and most importantly, spoil their grandchildren. Those things do take money, of course, probably as much as any house or yacht over the course of the long run. So it isn't that any one retirement goal is necessarily cheaper or more expensive than another. But the difference between a lifestyle goal and a major purchase goal comes down to how you're going to pay for that goal. When you bought your first new car, for example, did you pay in full or did you pay it out of your weekly income? Did you draw cash from a savings account that covered the full amount, or did you finance it? For a few people, the answer might be cash savings. But for most, the answer is probably that you finance it. The same goes true, of course, for your home and most major purchases. Those usually aren't the kinds of things we purchase from our regular income stream. They tend to require lump sum amounts or payment plans separate from your income. On the flip side, most of us probably wouldn't take out a loan or take a huge withdrawal from savings to go out and play golf, or to dine out at a nice restaurant, or to stay in a hotel, or even take a vacation. Those are things we generally finance from our income. And this is why I always pose the question, if your retirement goals include mainly things that you want to finance through your income, through your cash flow, then doesn't it make sense to gear your investment strategy toward generating income? I think you already know my answer for what I believe. After all, this show isn't called the income generation by accident. But this is where values become so incredibly important. You see, because making that determination, understanding the practicality and sense of investing for income is one thing, but acting on it is another. It takes the right values to be able to do it successfully, both from a technical and a personal standpoint. It takes values that not only help you identify when it's time to take the road less traveled, but again, the courage to act upon that knowledge once you see it. It takes the ability to zig while everyone else is zagging. And the plain truth is, not everyone possesses just the right values to manage money successfully. That includes even people who do it professionally. Let's face it, brokers and financial advisors are human beings. And as a result, many of them are wired the same way as individual investors. That's why I always say that just like 80% of the population may not be wired to be a good do-it-yourself investor, it shouldn't surprise anyone that 80% of financial advisors fall into that same statistic. But what exactly are the right values for protecting your money and investing for income? We'll talk about that more in just a bit. Right now, I'd like to welcome a man who, like me, literally wrote the book on values, actually a series of books. Bob Burg is going to help us understand why some of those old-fashioned values our parents and television parents taught us are still the best avenues to success in both business and in life. Bob Burg is a thought leader and popular speaker, always in demand with huge corporations, small companies, and business organizations of virtually every size and type. But Bob is perhaps best known for his best-selling book entitled The Go-Giver, a little story about a powerful business idea that he co-authored with John David Mann. In the 10 years since the book's release, the term go-giver has actually become shorthand for a set of values embraced by hundreds of thousands of people around the world, both in their work and in their daily lives. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Great to be with you.
Of course, what our viewers need to know is we've met many times before, and I was actually at an event where I saw Bob do a presentation in front of a group of people, read your book, and I love the go-giver concept.
Thank you.
So I guess my first question is, what motivated you to write a book entitled The Go-Giver with this whole concept, as opposed to a go-getter or a go-giver?
Sure. Well, my first major book was a book called Endless Referrals, which was a how-to book on how to create relationships where you develop the know, like, and trust with people, which results in more business. It results in a better feeling about the way you do business. The Go-Giver is a business parable, a fable. So it was a way of taking those kind of principles that you talk about, or the values you talk about, and putting them into story form. And I got to work with a wonderful co-author, a great storyteller by the name of John David Mann, as you mentioned. But it's really, in a sense, it's about shifting your focus from getting to giving. And when we say giving in this context, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing value to others, understanding that, especially in a free market-based environment where no one is forced to do business with anyone else, not only is it a pleasant way to conduct business, it's a very financially profitable way as well.
So before we dig down into the actual business side of it, can you tell our income generation members for just a minute, how they can use go-giver concepts in their everyday life if someone, for example, is retired?
Absolutely. And you know what? You talk about this so much in your book. It's a basic value system of understanding that when you can take your focus off yourself, when you can move from that all too common I focus or me focus, right, to an other focus. David, looking for ways to make other people's lives better, happier, more fulfilling. It just feels good, and people feel good about you.
I call it something, talk about the law of attraction a lot, and I talk about the law of abundance versus scarcity. That if you're thinking about me, it comes across that way. Right. But if you're thinking about what I can do for you, exactly, you get more in exchange in almost every area. Even personal relationships, right? You know,
Oh, absolutely.
if one of the gentlemen that's sitting here watching our show today decides that he's going to be motivated to go out and do something really special for his wife today, somehow, directly, indirectly, it's going to come back and benefit him, isn't it?
Well, you know, my folks just celebrated 60 years of marriage. They adore each other. And one thing my dad always said to me, and he said this when I was, and we kind of put this in the book as part of the story. I said, how is it you and Mom have such a great marriage? I was, I think, 10 years old, 12 years old, when all my friends' parents were. He said, Bob, when you truly love someone, you actually care more about their happiness than about your own. And he didn't mean that in the way of codependency or something like that. No, he meant when you truly seek value in the purpose, in the happiness of those you love. Again, it feels great, but that other person feels the same way about you.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. I love it. And I can't hear you talk about this stuff too much. It's impossible.
Thank you.
Because it's just all part of what's woven into your being as an individual, and the same kind of life I tried to live. I don't always succeed, but I try. So in the book, there's a story about a financial advisor. How did you come up with that particular character? Is it copied after someone? If it is, I'm sure you're not going to tell me who it is. But
well, no, it was a gentleman that, and it was loosely based on, but it was still the basic story of Ben Feldman, who was a very well-known, actually more in insurance and so forth, and he had learned, just as the character in the book, that when he took his eyes off himself, when he thought he was selling insurance to people, he wasn't doing very well because it was about him, it was about the product. When he took his eyes off himself and realized what it was really about is helping people attain happiness, as they understood happiness. And I think when we do that, all of a sudden things really start to come together for us. And that's when he realized that when he could take his focus off himself and place it on others' happiness, that's when all of a sudden his business really started to climb. And as many of us know the story of Ben Feldman, the probably best of all time.
Well, the story of Ben Feldman is really about someone who is probably the most successful life insurance agent ever, even today. And the thing about Ben Feldman is he didn't need a lot of crutches or backup in order to convince people of the value of life insurance. It was really simple because he just focused on what was important to them and their values, and the life insurance fulfilled a need. So great story, great metaphor. We have to take a commercial break right now. We're going to be right back in just a minute with more words of wisdom from the original go-giver, Bob Berg.
Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle, 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Stop planning for retirement with your fingers crossed. Read Return on Principle, 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Available now.
As we record this show, the markets are still technically in a rally that began with Donald Trump's election in November. But they're also responding negatively to a Newsweek's worth of controversy surrounding the Trump administration. In fact, all 3 market indices were down between 1% and 1.5% in the wake of new media allegations about President Trump's White House meeting with Russia's foreign minister and about the firing of FBI Director James Comey. Regardless of what you think about these allegations or the mainstream media in general, the potential for these kinds of distractions to disrupt his domestic agenda seem very real. That's important because, as we've discussed many times, the post-election rally is based mainly on optimism about President Trump's economic agenda. If criminal allegations and nonstop media firestorms derail or even delay that agenda, the question becomes, what might that mean for the overvalued stock market? It's a question that gets to the heart of why it's so important to possess the right values for managing your money, especially in uncertain times. You might think the main value I'm referring to now is something like cautiousness or restraint, and maybe those would be right if you were in your 30s. But if you're over the age of 50 and you're part of the income generation, then you perhaps didn't go far enough with cautiousness and restraint. See, the first value I advocate for managing your money once you're past age 50 is this thing we call overprotection, the willingness and ability to err on the side of caution where your assets are concerned. Often that means going against what's popular or trendy. It means zigging while others are zagging. And it means that going against others when they're telling you to zag also. To some extent, it has meant that for today's overprotective investors ever since 2013. See, that's when the stock market rebounded to its previous peak from before the 2007 to 2008 crash. It has trended upward even ever since 2013, reaching new records several times. Now, some brokers and financial advisors will say that if you haven't had most of your savings in the stock market over these last 4 years, no matter who you are, you've been missing out on gains. I would argue these advisors probably don't possess the most important core value for saving and investing within 15 years of retirement, and that is, again, overprotection. Chances are they may not possess any other critical value necessary for the job either, including detail orientation. You see, I believe that if they were detail-oriented, they would understand that none of the market rallies we've seen since 2013 have been based upon economic realities. Instead, they've been based on unprecedented levels of manipulation by the Federal Reserve. They've been based on stock buybacks, hiring freezes, and other tricks by corporations to disguise their lack of growth on the bottom line. They've been based on pure emotion and irrational exuberance, which is certainly the case with the so-called Trump bump. In other words, the market has been very high risk throughout this so-called recovery, which I would argue hasn't been a true economic recovery as much as it's been an asset recovery. Yes, investors over age 50 who have been taking the risk following the busy road instead of following the road less traveled have lucked out so far. But an increasing number of economists are warning that they may be living on borrowed time and that the overvalued stock market is overdue for another major market correction. The lessons of market history suggest the same thing, and President Trump's trouble-plagued presidency may trigger it sooner rather than later. And what about fixed income investors who've been taking the road less traveled, who've been living by the values of overprotection and detail orientation, either on their own or through a financial advisor? Have they really been missing out? Well, if their goals are aligned and not in conflict with their strategy, then no, they've only been missing out on unnecessary risk. Why? Because by also practicing diligence, leadership, and other essential core values, they've been enjoying solid returns through income-based retirement strategies designed to match their goals. So now, let's bring back our guest today, Bob Berg, the original go-giver.
Thank you, David.
You're very welcome. So Bob, we've been talking so far about things like how the go-giver concept could be used generally, not just financially, but in general ways in people's lifetime, because a lot of people are watching us, the income generation members are retired. But I also know that a lot of those are not retired, and that's why the show airs on a weekend. So one of the things we talked about earlier on the show, as you heard, was the fact that to be a good investor, sometimes you have to be a contrarian. How does being a contrarian go hand in hand with that go-giver concept?
Well, many of the 5 laws are contrarian in nature, whether it's the law of value that says your true worth in the business sense or in the personal sense is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. And what that means is not that you don't profit, and profit is not just financial. We can profit financially, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, socially, relationally, all sorts of ways. But what it means is when you're always focused on giving to others and helping them profit, help them bring about their happiness, because remember, everyone pursues happiness in their own way according to their own values, and the pursuit of happiness is one of our, it's one of our big 3, right, in this country. So when we focus on giving more in value to others, boom, that starts the echo effect. And as we say, money is an echo of value, but so is love, so is kindness, so is everything else that's good.
Well, it's funny because you talk a lot about crony capitalism and how some people don't see it the way you see it.
Right. Well, unfortunately, many people, especially those on the political left, they see crony capitalism as being the same as capitalism. And the fact is, crony capitalism is to capitalism what Chinese checkers is to checkers. Nothing. Only the name is, right? Because crony capitalism is not free market capitalism. Free market capitalism says that government has the legitimate function of protecting its citizenry from force and fraud, but other than that, it's leave everyone alone to buy, trade, sell with each other. And when they simply do that now, people are able to buy because they believe it will bring them happiness as they value happiness. People are able to sell for the same. And what that does is it creates a true economy for everyone, as opposed to the false economy that's created when government puts their hands where it really shouldn't be.
Well, that's why it's great. Just last week we had Steve Forbes on, sitting in your seat, talking about how to get true growth, and it's very much the same. When I think of go-giver concept and people getting compensated to the extent to which they give value, the person I always think about is Steve Jobs. If you think about, it wasn't long ago I was walking around with a flip phone, and you probably were too, and now we can't get away from those things. They're our phone, they're our computer, they're virtually everything. So can you give us some other ideas of some other corporate leaders that you'd put in that go-giver category?
Well, I think of Bob Chapman, who's the chairman and CEO of Barry Waymiller, a huge, humongous manufacturing firm based out of St. Louis, but worldwide. And he also wrote a book called Everybody Matters. And here's a man who absolutely treats his employees as family members. It's not just a slogan on the wall. He understands that making them feel good about where they work, feeling good about themselves is not only, again, the right way to do business, but then they have more invested in their job. And they have a wonderful family of companies. That's a true go-giver and a go-giver company.
That's a go-giver, yeah. If you're a go-giver, you don't have to be a chaser and a go-getter, because you're a go-giver. It's perfect. So, okay, if in the corporate world then, I always complain about the fact that although we have the best system, I believe, in the world economically, there is a bit of conflict of interest. We talked about the media in a recent show, where we talked about the fact that, a CEO their fiduciary responsibility is to maximize shareholder value, not to do the best thing for the customer, do the best thing for shareholders. And that is an inherent conflict of interest. But you're saying if a corporation follows the go-giver concept in the last 45 seconds or so we have, then really it's a win-win, isn't it?
Look at an old example that people use all the time because it's so great, Southwest Airlines. Okay, here's a company who, in a field in which no one is profitable, they have been profitable, other than the first year they were in business, they've been profitable every single year because they focus on bringing value to their team of people, and their team of people focuses on bringing value to their customers. They do the right thing. As Harry Brown used to say, profit is simply the reward for pleasing the customer.
That's great. So you a Southwest flyer, I assume?
When I get to fly on Southwest, I love it. But I typically go to where my clients hold their sales conventions, and I take the best plane out there to get there.
I love Southwest too, except for that I'm not from the Midwest, and that whole herding concept.
Yeah,
that's the only thing I don't like about it so much. But we have to go. Before we do, though, can you do me a favor, and can you please tell our Income Generation members where they can get their copy of The Go-Giver?
Sure. Visit thegogiver.com. No hyphen, just thegogiver.com, and you can get chapter 1 while you're there.
That was easy, wasn't it?
Sure was.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right, stay with us. We're going to have our Financial Advisor Roundtable as soon as we come back in the Income Generation. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Income Generation. I'm Miranda Kahn. Now let's take a look at some of the big finance news stories that moved the market this week. The Congressional Budget Office released its new scoring of the GOP's health care plan. According to that report, 23 million Americans will lose coverage under the American Health Care Act. But the deficit would fall $119 billion over the next 9 years. U.S. stock ownership hasn't yet recovered since the 2008 financial crisis. This, according to a new Gallup survey. It found that only 54% of adults say they own stocks. That is down 8 points from 62% before the crisis. American steel makers warn that foreign imports threaten national security. They argue the flood of imports erodes their profit margins and their ability to meet U.S. defense needs. But foreign governments disagree. They say the industry adequately meets the need. And some good news for Sears. The retailer posted its first quarterly profit in nearly 2 years. The gain is reportedly due to the company's sale of its Craftsman brand and a program to cut more than $1 billion in cost. For much more on these stories, visit newsmax.com/finance. Now back to David Scranton and the Income Generation.
Thanks, Miranda. Now that you're all up to date, let's hear from some other financial advisors in the field and get their insights on today's topic of values. It's time for another Financial Advisors Roundtable. Joining me today, we have Mike Burley and David Wright. Mike Burley is president of Peak Capital Management in Jensen Beach, Florida. He's been an advisor for over 25 years and has helped thousands of clients protect their hard-earned savings and achieve their retirement goals. David Wright is the owner of Wright Financial Group in Toledo, Ohio. And he wins the contest because he's got 31 years of experience under his financial belt. Actually, one year more than yours truly. He and his team work closely with clients to design tailor-made financial strategies for individuals, families, and businesses, specializing particularly in, you guessed it, retirement planning. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Thanks for having us.
So first, let's talk about you and what value you think is most important in how you determine how to run your practice. David?
Good question, Dave. There's a lot of values that are important to the financial planning process. But, you know, the one thing that I think I bring to the clients or prospects more than anything else is the art of listening. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use them in that proportion. And many times when I meet with people for the very first time, it is absolutely eye-opening how awestruck they are that someone digs into as much details as we dig into, not just the hard data, but the data that's important about retirement, what's important to them, grandchildren, traveling, and tuning out the world and tuning into them, zoning into them is probably the most enjoyable and exciting part of what I do.
Well, wait a minute. You can't be a real man, right? Because we all know that men don't listen. They just like to hear themselves talk. And unfortunately, most financial advisors are men. So, and I've seen you before. Weren't you in that movie, what's that movie called? Mrs. Doubtfire? Was that you, Dave?
Well, it was, Dave. How are you, sir?
Mike.
Hey, you're busting my chops here.
Hey, we got to have some fun. We're on television, right? Mike, tell our Income Generation members in your practice what you think is the most important value to help you run your practice successfully and to add the most value for your clients.
Well, what I find, Dave, is most of our clients are 55 and up. They're either in retirement or near retirement. And when we meet with them, we find that a lot of times they've done really well with saving as far as 401ks, IRAs, but they really don't have any defined goals for the retirement. Believe it or not, and they don't have any defined strategies. So if you don't have any defined strategies, you don't have any defined goals, those two things can be in conflict. So what we like to do is sit down with their clients and find out really what their retirement is going to be all about. Nobody's really ever asked them that question. In other words, what do you want to do in your retirement? Is it going to be travel, visit the grandkids, golf, whatever your hobbies are, that type of thing. Once we have that information, we're able to put a plan together and build that around their goals.
Now, Mike, I can't help but ask you here. You're sitting there, and of course, there's a door behind you. So is that an escape route in case you have angry clients? I mean, what's up with the door? I need to know.
Well, it's actually an escape route in the event where maybe the clients aren't a fit for us. We have a way to put them out the back door.
Excellent answer. I love it. That's great. So tell me what values now that you see your clients who come in, which values are most important for them? Give me like the top 2 values you find are most important for these individuals, most of whom I know in each of your practices are part of the income generation. David?
I think the most important goals today are leadership, honesty. It's easy to follow the herd mentality, and I'm shocked to see clients and prospects come in here day after day who have goals in retirement when we ask them, many of which Mike just highlighted, but their assets aren't put in places that can meet those goals. So having the leadership having leadership values means feeling alone and sometimes not following the herd. It's important to have that courage to have honest conversations with clients so you know that their assets are aligned for their go-go years, their slow-go years, and so on. So it's important to be a good listener, even though you don't think men are good listeners. They really, and some men are, even Mrs. Doubtfire.
It's just that's what women told me. That's why I believe it. If they say it, it must be correct, right, guys? So I know you mentioned leadership, and I talked earlier in the show, as you two know, about The Road Less Traveled, Robert Frost's famous poem. And I guess your way of defining it, and also in my book, I define it as leadership, which means the ability for people to take that road less traveled. You have to be a leader, not a follower, in order to do that. So I agree with you completely. And honesty, because if one's not brutally honest with him or herself, well, then they're not going to be able to do what they need to do to have a successful retirement. Mike, how would you answer that question?
Well, very similar to David. I mean, if you're going to follow the herd, you got to kind of sort of watch where you step, right? So,
True.
show people that you care. I know as corny as that sounds, but that's the number one thing. You got to let people you care about, their retirement. Number one goal for us is to find out, again, what their goals are in retirement. Show them that you care about what they want to accomplish, and then you can build a plan around that.
So tell me, what do you think prevents people, when you see conflict, as you said, David, between someone's goals and values versus their strategy? Give me an idea, first of all, of not what caused it, but what's the conflict that you most commonly see? Let's start there.
Well, the most common conflict I see is the inability for that client or prospect to really accurately assess the risk that they have. I being the elder statesman here, having 31 years of doing this, when you and I first broke into the business, Dave, there were a lot of corporate sponsored pension plans. People didn't have to worry about their income. They simply worked for 30 years for one company and had a pension plan. But as you know, in the 80s and 90s, that kind of went away and everything got put into the consumer's hand to plan for their own retirement. And the 80s and 90s were robust years in the stock market. But once 2000 occurred, it's been less advantageous for clients and prospects. Sure. They come to retirement, they don't know necessarily the skills that got them to retirement are not the skills to get them to the end of retirement.
Now, David, I do have to tell you, you are a good-looking guy and all, and I know you love to look at yourself on the right-hand corner of your screen there while you're Skyping. But really, we're up here. We're straight ahead in the camera, so you can look at yourself in the mirror later after we get off the show, if that's okay.
Oh, gee, thanks. Now
Mike, in the 30 seconds we have left, tell us what values you think are most in conflict when you talk to your clients.
Well, we get a lot of clients that come in, they just don't even realize the risk that they're taking. We have a tax practice. We had somebody in last month, matter of fact, and reviewing their tax return and going over their brokerage statements. They seemed like conservative people, and they found out they had 100% of their account in equities. Well, yeah, and the response was, well, we have conservative stock.
Oh, I love that. That's my favorite. What an oxymoron, really conservative stock. Isn't it ridiculous?
They really just don't know until you sit down and explain it to them.
Well, we need to take a break now, so gentlemen, I assume you could stick around for a little while. For Income Generation members, stay with us. We're going to dive next into the philosophy, psychologically, why these conflicts exist. If you're near or in retirement, head over to the incomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching the Income Generation. Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, your host. Now let's bring back our Financial Advisor Roundtable. Again, we have David Wright, the owner of Wright Financial Group in Toledo, Ohio, and Mike Burley, the president of Peak Capital Management, just a little bit north of us here in Jensen Beach, Florida. Gentlemen, thanks for sticking around.
Thanks, David.
So, we talked about some of the conflict that clients of yours have when they first walk in the door between their values and their strategies, but mostly in terms of risk versus stage of life. But have you ever thought about why that conflict exists? What creates it in the first place? Dave?
I think it's pretty simple. I mean, people love opening their statements when they know markets are up. And it's that whole concept that drives the market, fear and greed. They're natural human tendencies. When things are up, people want to open their statements. They want to try to squeeze out every last drop of gain they can make. But you and I both know from 03 and 08, I had clients that had 401ks with their companies. They wouldn't open statements for quarters on end because they didn't want to see the negative news. So I think their goals and how they're invested are in direct conflict because of that reason.
The human emotions of fear and greed. Mike?
Yes, sir.
What would you say?
Well, to me, it's one of the most challenging things that we have to deal with is actually breaking good habits. And what I mean by that is you take an individual investor, he or she's working 20, 30, 40 years, and all of a sudden they're in retirement. And for that whole period of time, they've developed the habit of saving, putting money away in their IRAs, 401ks, year in, year out, year in, year out for 20, 30, 40 years. So this is deeply ingrained into them. And all of a sudden now they're in retirement. So that changes. Now they're going to, bill paying doesn't go away in retirement. Now they want income, but they have a difficult time spending the money they've accumulated, spending their interest in dividends, because that habit has been so deeply ingrained in them over 20, 30, 40 years. So it's almost like you're part financial advisor, part psychologist with some of these clients.
So they have what we often refer to as the 401k mindset, the 401k brain, and it's hard to make that paradigm shift, it seems. I always talk about the fact that if a particular, let's say a basketball team, last night Cleveland, and we're recording this, Cleveland just had the last game, beating the Celtics. They're ahead by so much with a few minutes to go that it was all about defense, not so much offense. But I guess my next question then is, how much you think other financial advisors are at fault for this, for maybe perpetuating that mindset that's in direct conflict with the values of most retirees and pre-retirees? Dave?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with who that advisor works for or works with, whether they're independent, whether they do their own research. Most of the clients that come in here that have multiple advisors have heard their advisor that's drank the Kool-Aid of Wall Street, along with all the hype on TV. We just find that they're way over invested in stocks and not thinking about dividends and interest. And their advisor at other locations comes off more like the rah, rah, go Wall Street type of person. And it's tough to sometimes break through that. But when they see what the risks really are long term and how that could impact their values in retirement, many times they wake up. They wake up and see it. But I think that has a lot to do with it. It's the current status of our media, what things look like on TV, what their advisors are saying.
So you're talking about the dreaded Wall Street cheerleader, full with the cheerleader uniform, the pom-poms jumping up and down. And no, Dave, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to imitate the cheerleader. I'll save you that.
All right, thank you.
Mike, why do you think this happens with some financial advisors?
We kind of all get painted with the same brush, Dave. And the reality is, we couldn't be more different.
Yeah, people think the name financial advisor is just, it's all the same, but it's not. It's like saying every doctor is the same. It doesn't work that way, does it?
It does not work that way, but the general public does not know that. They walk in, they say anybody can call themselves a financial advisor. They walk in, they don't understand the business model of the different financial advisors. Some are more risk-based, some are more conservative. They don't know walking in the door. So they definitely need to ask a series of questions before they hire somebody.
I can see why in Jensen Beach retirees flock to you, Mike, because with that income-based model, I mean, it's what they need, and we probably have nobody else in town that's doing that, which is probably why you have those sunglasses, because when you go out in public, you don't want other advisors taking pot shots at you, so you need to go with a disguise. Is that what the glasses are about?
Yeah, this is true. I have to kind of go incognito sometimes. You just got to kind of watch it. You never know who's going to come up to you. So,
both you guys, I have to tell you, I love you guys, but I also hate you guys because you guys are all a couple years older than me, and you have way, way too much hair on your head for somebody who's at all older than me, for goodness sake. With that comment, we'll be right back. And for Income Generation viewers, we have much more in terms of words of wisdom from our Financial Advisors Roundtable. Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. This is fun. This is great. 3, 2, 1. But I'd like to take a few seconds and tell you why I decided to write the book entitled Return on Principle. Basically, it all boils down to this. Let's face it, you deserve to live a happy retirement. It's as simple as that. But for many, the subject of money, finance, and math is complicated. Here's a fun fact. Many Americans claim that they'd much rather clean a toilet than calculate a tip in a restaurant. Thank you, I guess. but it doesn't have to be that complicated. Using the 7 core values I outline in my book, you too will be able to build a life based upon the right core principles. Cut. Return on Principle isn't just a book about financial investing, it's about investing in your life. I know for a fact that you're going to love it. Okay, now it's just getting a little weird here. Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm Dave Scranton, your host, and today with us are David Wright and Mike Burley, financial advisors with a cumulative of 56 years of experience between the two of them. So, I think you're both right that the reason that there's conflict regarding advisors, what advisors teach, most advisors teach clients, that is creates conflict between the values and the actual strategies, is part of it, yes, the Wall Street cheerleader effect. I certainly think that's some of it. And the other part of it is the source of the research. But I think part of it also has to do with how difficult, how much diligence it takes to really invest in fixed income. Most people don't realize that advisors have gotten lazy in the 80s and 90s with the advent of mutual funds. And fixed income takes a lot of work. In fact, it takes more work than stock picking. Stock picking, you kind of go, okay, I think this stock is going to go up, and you buy it, and hopefully you're right. It's more of a subjective right brain function. But fixed income analysis is much more of a left brain function. So, how much of this do you think really has to do with just laziness of financial advisors or the industry in general?
Well, I think
for a lot of advisors, it's just, if they're more geared towards stock market-based investing, and they can just kind of sort of check the box and put the client in a bond fund, so there's no real management there. There's no real active management.
And that's about how much work it takes. That's about how much work it takes to buy a bond fund too, right? You just simply check the box.
Yeah, it takes about 30 seconds. So, not a lot involved there, but it's not really fixed income investing.
Okay. David?
People just don't understand the time and the research that it takes to not only find the right fixed income investment, but the right timing of when to purchase it. And it requires patience, it requires diligence, and most of all, it requires a lot of research. And like you said, Wall Street is intoxicating. People have gotten away from the income model, but everything old is new again. And this whole concept of income investing is not new. It's been around. It's just been forgotten.
It's going back to basics if you think about it in lots of ways.
Absolutely.
But what do you think though? Is it how much of this has to do with corporations trying to cover their own rear ends by being able to outsource? Big brokerage firms outsourcing a lot of the management. Do you think that's part of it too?
Yeah, I don't think they want to deal with it anymore. Absolutely.
It's still a bit of CYA, right? Because if you have a broker out there picking individual things, you might do good things or bad things, create liability for the corporation. But if you outsource it to a third-party money manager, you have, as the attorneys would call, plausible deniability. So since we're speaking,
layer of protection.
What's that?
You build in that layer of protection.
You are. That's correct. That's correct. So since we're talking about diligence here, when we come back, we're going to give you a little quiz. I hope you gentlemen don't mind. We're going to find out how you do your research. Okay, so I want you to think about that while we're taking our break. And for Income Generation members, stay with us. We'll see how they do, whether they pass the test or not. We'll be right back in a moment. Gentlemen, so now that you had a commercial break there to talk about, to think about the answers to the question, how would you answer the question in terms of how you do your research? And remember, this is one of the questions I put in my book, Return on Principle, for people who are interviewing advisors. So let's hope you get this right. Mike?
Well, we do our own research here. So I have to set aside time each week and research through various sources. Bond markets, bond and bond-like instruments, unlike the stock market, aren't efficient markets. So we have to look at different factors. We look at the credit quality of the companies, the ability of the companies to meet their obligations, those type of things. So we have to set aside time each week to do that.
And you talk about credit quality. You can't just trust the rating agencies anymore, can you, Mike?
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Not after 08, 09.
That's right. Dave, how would you answer that question? How do you do your research for your clients?
That's a good question, Dave. I've taken on the outsourcing of my investment research, but I've done it in the right way for income investing. Who I use They take time to select individual securities, the whole universe of non-stock market income generating type investments. It takes time. It takes a lot of research, and not only research on my part with the outsourcing firm, but with the clients themselves.
So you don't. So in other words, you don't just check off a box and throw them in some bond fund. You've outsourced to professionals and know what they're doing, right? Well, gentlemen, you both passed the test according to my book. So for anyone who's reading my book in your area, who's coming to see you and interview you as a potential advisor, you're going to pass the test. Thanks for being here today, both Dave and Mike. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks,
Thank you, David.
Thanks for having us.
And again, I want to thank all of my guests for joining us for another stimulating episode of The Income Generation. I'd also like to thank you, our new and returning viewers. I hope we've helped shed at least some light on why it's so incredibly important to examine your own values in relationship to your retirement goals. Do you have the right values and characteristics to achieve those goals? Are you practicing overprotection, detail orientation? Are you willing to take the road less traveled when you know it's time? And do you know exactly how to take it? These are questions I'd encourage you to examine closely and answer with brutal honesty about yourself and about your financial advisor. Again, you or he may possess and live by all the kinds of positive values. It's completely possible. But if you don't have just the right ones for this particular job, it's probably a good idea to find someone who does. There's simply too much at stake to leave this issue to chance when we're talking about your life savings. So, if you're close to retirement and you really want to know how to protect and maximize your money, it's absolutely essential you stay informed and up to date. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.